Thanks for joining us today, and we will be reviewing new research being launched through the IBM Center for Applied Insights titled Champions of Software as a Service, How SaaS is Fueling Competitive Advantage. This is an internal enablement webinar. It'll last roughly 20 minutes, and it's designed to provide our sellers and the broader IBM organization with an overview of this research before it hits the market on Monday, January 27th. Next slide, please. Today's speakers will include Suzanne Hupfer, who is the Client Insights Consultant for the IBM Center for Applied Insights. She led this research effort and was immersed in the findings and will be sharing a lot of the deep insights. And then I will provide some insights on outcomes at the end, walk through a few case studies, and point to some additional resources where you can learn more about the IBM Software as a Service portfolio and the study itself. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Suzanne to kick off the research insights.
Thank you, Armin. And if we can go to the next slide, please. In late 2013, the IBM Center for Applied Insights published a global study of how organizations use cloud computing to accelerate competitive differentiation. And from that study, we found that leading organizations are building competitive advantage with cloud in three primary ways: through deeper collaboration, strategic reinvention, and better decisions. And in each of these areas, they're deriving business results from their use of cloud. We found that they're 79% more likely to use cloud to find experts anywhere in their ecosystem, whether inside or outside the organization, and to leverage their expertise. We also found that they're 136% more likely to use cloud to reinvent customer relationships, and 170% more likely to use analytics extensively via the cloud to derive insights for their organizations. Within cloud, software as a service is a key growth segment. In fact, it's forecasted to grow at an annual growth rate of over 20% over the next several years until it becomes a $45.6 billion market by 2017. Given that SaaS is such a critical piece of the overall cloud picture, we decided to take a deeper research dive into SaaS. Next slide, please. To get a global snapshot of how organizations are approaching and using software as a service, the IBM Center for Applied Insights conducted a new global study of 879 IT and line of business decision makers, this time focusing on companies that have adopted SaaS. 12% of the respondents are C-level line of business executives, and 10% are C-level IT executives. The remainder consists of VPs, directors, and managers, split roughly evenly between business and IT functions. Respondents work in enterprises of varying sizes. 20% are in enterprises that have 10,000 or more employees, and at the other end of the spectrum, 40% have fewer than 2,500 employees. Participants span 23 industries and 6 countries, with 43% coming from mature markets and 57% coming from growth markets. The growth markets we studied include Brazil, China, India, and South Africa, while the mature markets studied include the United Kingdom and the United States. Next slide. What's driving the enormous demand for SaaS? We found that reducing the total cost of ownership of applications was the top reason driving enterprises to adopt SaaS. And in fact, we found that 41% of organizations report achieving reduced TCO to a high degree. However, what surprised us was that an even greater number of enterprises, 47%, are using SaaS to attain a broad range of powerful benefits that combine to deliver something even more significant, namely competitive advantage. Next slide, please. To learn more about the business outcomes that organizations are achieving through SaaS and how they're attaining those results, we grouped organizations based on their level of SaaS adoption and whether they're reporting competitive advantage from SaaS, as you can see in this graph. The leading organizations in red, the pace setters, which represent the top 19% of our respondents, are those that are reporting the highest level of SaaS adoption and are gaining competitive advantage over their rivals through their broad SaaS efforts. The middle group, the challengers, which makes up 41% of our respondents, have adopted SaaS more narrowly than the pacesetters, but they're gaining competitive advantage through the SaaS deployments that they do have. And finally, the last group, in the dark blue, with 40% of the respondents, are the chasers. These organizations are more cautious about SaaS. They're both slower to adopt SaaS and, accordingly, slower to gain competitive advantage through it. Next slide, please. One very interesting difference between the pacesetters and those lagging behind them is what leads them to turn to SaaS in the first place. So we took a look at the top motivators the groups report for using SaaS. And we found that challengers and chasers are primarily motivated by reducing the total cost of ownership. And their next motivator is boosting application agility. That is, making it easier to quickly, easily, and flexibly deploy and implement solutions. However, pacesetters are mainly driven by the desire to use SaaS to improve collaboration, both across the organization and throughout their ecosystem, as well as to improve the customer experience. And then we found that achieving faster time to market comes in as their number 3 motivation. So the success of the pacesetters suggests that taking a more outward-focused, customer-centric approach can help put organizations on the path to competitive advantage. We'll see next that pacesetters are also taking a pretty distinctive approach to their SaaS strategy and implementation, which is what's helping them gain their competitive edge. Next slide, please. A popular belief about SaaS is that with its ease of purchase and deployment, it requires little involvement from IT organizations. And in fact, SaaS is sometimes even perceived as driving a wedge between IT and LOB in the enterprise. But what we found is that for pacesetters, that's just not the case. Pacing enterprises actually attest to a strong collaboration between line of business and IT on matters that range from directing SaaS solutions to securing them. For example, line of business and IT strongly collaborate on SaaS selection and deployment in 71% of pacesetter organizations, while only 36% of chasers report a strong collaboration. And 70% of pacesetters report that SaaS is strengthening the IT and LOB relationship versus only 39% of chaser organizations who enjoyed that benefit. Next slide, please. In fact, in the pacesetter enterprises, IT and LOB regard each other as strategic partners on SaaS. When we ask the IT respondents how they view their LOB colleagues when it comes to SaaS, 72% of pacesetter IT respondents said that they view LOB as a strategic partner for SaaS, versus just 22% of chaser IT respondents that have that point of view. And on the flip side, when the line of business respondents were asked how they view IT in their organization, we found that 66% of pacesetter line of business respondents report viewing IT as a strategic partner for SaaS, versus just 31% of the chaser LOB respondents saying the same thing. Next slide, please. Beyond fostering collaboration and these closer internal relationships, pacesetters are far more likely than chasers and challengers to view SaaS from a strategic standpoint, rather than just viewing it as a tactical tool for standalone solutions. Compared to chasers, more than twice as many pacesetters have a cohesive enterprise-wide SaaS strategy. That's 71% of the pacesetters versus 31% of the chasers. We also found that pacesetters are 4 times more likely to position SaaS as an integral part of their enterprise cloud strategy. So now we've seen that pacesetters have a more outward-looking perspective, that they're more inclusive and are more collaborative, and that they place a greater emphasis on strategy over tactics. So how exactly does this different approach translate into better business outcomes and gaining a competitive edge? I'll turn it over now to Armin Najarian, who will be taking us on a deep dive through the SaaS outcomes.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. And on slide 11, I just want to spend a moment just talking about what these outcomes look like from a pacesetter perspective. It's really important to reinforce that there's a higher order set of outcomes that were called out in this research around deeper collaboration, the ability to make better decisions, and the ability to be more agile and quick in the marketplace. And that's not to minimize the value that comes from being more efficient and having enterprise efficiency, driven through software as a service, but really an emphasis, especially within this pacesetter population, driving best practices. These higher order outcomes are really important, and where we'd like to focus some of these examples as I walk through these case studies. So on the next slide, please, just to drill down and just spend a moment on enterprise efficiency. Think of this as foundational value, foundational capability that in many ways, as you'll probably hear out in the marketplace, can be thought of as table stakes. Of course, software as a service and really any application should drive a more efficient way to do things. I want to specifically highlight a few of these areas that we've called out below. The increase in self-service capability for applications, as we can see here in that first row, pacesetters surpassing chasers by 185%. And I think of that as the ability to self-administer, how a capability is configured, change the configuration settings, adjust a setting or a way that a field shows up. All that being self-service is inherent in software as a service, and that's part of enterprise efficiency. The second one, optimizing business processes and workflows, again, really critical as we start to get into specific use cases, as you'll see in some of the case studies around workflow-specific capabilities within an organization. So the ability to define, the path and information sharing and, approval cycles, that is all really important. What customers are expecting to see here. We see that pacesetters surpassing chasers by 126% with acknowledging that level of enterprise efficiency. And then finally, just improved application agility, which is defined as being flexible in how these applications are deployed and implemented. We see pacesetters surpassing chasers by 136% on that point alone. And again, here it's the pacesetters acknowledging that software as a service drives specific efficiency around application agility, with how these capabilities are deployed, are onboarded, are accessed by different users around the world. So again, not to minimize the efficiency, it's an important part of the overall value equation, but it's higher order outcomes that we also want to recognize with respect to the pacesetters. Next slide, please, as we move into three vignettes, if you will, and I do want to highlight that these three case studies were existing IBM SaaS case studies that we brought into the research just as a way to add color to some of these key points and some of these key outcomes, and we've drawn the linkages between the two. So this first one, Safeguard World, it's a global company. They're in the business of managed payroll services, and they have capabilities to help large and small organizations manage outsourced payroll processes. Safeguard World has adopted IBM Smart Cloud for Social Business collaboration capabilities, how information is shared, how knowledge is shared internally, where documents get stored, all critical foundational knowledge management processes that are essential to a company like Safeguard, which is a very process-driven organization in terms of the value they deliver. And so we've paired that case study with these two call-outs down below around driving deeper collaboration and what that means for pacesetters. So this first point at the bottom around increasing collaboration across the organization and across the ecosystem. Pacesetters surpass chasers by 79% in identifying with that value statement. And that's a really important statement, again, in a process-driven environment and a process-driven use case. How information gets shared internally and externally is really foundational to Safeguard and a lot of businesses that are in a similar space in terms of managing information and managing documents and workflowing those documents. The second value that we wanted to highlight here is improving core business relationships. So think of this as the human side to the business and how the SaaS capabilities, how social business and collaboration capabilities help drive and foster better business relationships. Again, both internally, those relationships are just as important as different stakeholders interact with one another, as it is externally with customers and various value chain partners. So pacesetters agree with that statement, versus pacesetters by a factor of 150%, 54% more. So a really important value statement as it relates to collaboration. The next case study revolves around a client in the retail sector. PAC 2000A is an Italian-based retailer leveraging the IBM demand tech pricing optimization capability. This is a capability that helps ingest retail data and drive better decisions around how items are priced in the store relative to competition, relative to volume and profit objectives. So it's a very core capability to support a retailer strategy. What we wanted to contrast that or pair that example with is just the ability to make better decisions and some of the insights that we drew from the research as far as outcomes. So in highly analytical environments like the PAC 2000 example, this first line item around leveraging analytics across the organization to turn big data into insights, that very much summarizes the use case that I described with PAC 2000, taking that point of sale data and converting that into some sort of actionable decision on how that affects a really core process within the organization. As we can see here, pacesetters versus chasers identify with that statement 112% more than the chasers as really critical to how their organization makes decisions and takes these analytics and drives those into insights. The second point I want to highlight is achieving better decision making. So pacesetters agreeing with that statement 157% more than chasers. Really, really important. Having the data and even having an analytic is important, but being able to internalize that to actually drive a decision, to drive an outcome that affects a strategy is really that last mile that's really, really critical. And the ability for a pacesetter, as called out in this study, to be able to take those data and those analytics and convert those into actionable decisions is really what this point is all about. And a really important point in this study, with analytics being everywhere, converting those analytics into actionable decisions is really that critical last mile. On the third case study, we're moving into a completely different sector in the travel and transportation space. Virgin Atlantic leveraging the IBM digital analytics capability, the old Core Metrics branded product, and so this is the capability that sits and attaches to the digital properties, the website for Virgin Atlantic and other digital properties, and helps their marketing organizations and other organizations really understand how consumers are interacting with the various web properties, how they're converting from one page into a sale, from a content page into an actual transaction, to help drive better decisions around that experience for that user. And more importantly, how those insights can help drive a more competitive position in the marketplace for Virgin Atlantic. So a really important case study that we wanted to pair with some of these market agility outcomes and really the value that those outcomes deliver to the pacesetter population. So as you'll see here at the bottom, we have 4 of those values that we've highlighted. I want to specifically call out the increased innovation, the very first one, where pacesetters surpass the chasers by 126%, with identifying with that statement. And really, if you think about it from a marketer's perspective, using digital analytics to constantly iterate, try something new, look at the data, make a quick change. If consumers aren't responding to the size of a buy button or the position of a new graphic, for example, being able to iterate on that very quickly using this data to drive a more competitive and compelling position in the marketplace is what this is all about. So a really important value as far as being more agile in the marketplace as being enabled through digital analytics. I want to call out the third row on that chart at the bottom, improve customer experience. Really, really important. Customers are elusive. Yes, while customers might be loyal to a brand, they expect a smooth user experience. So leveraging digital analytics, as Virgin has done, to drive not just a more effective outcome, but just a better overall user experience. Again, back to that human dimension, a really, really important way to leverage analytics. We see pacesetters identifying with that by 127% more than chasers. So again, how pacesetters are internalizing these values and making a difference in their organization is really what separates that part of this study segmentation versus the chaser community. And finally, I want to call it that last row, how SaaS has changed an organization's business model. So a really important example, perhaps not as specifically with Virgin Atlantic, but we've seen with other IBM SaaS case studies how the ability for SaaS with building an ecosystem, with the ability to rapidly onboard and iterate with new pricing models and new revenue models, how that's helped to really change the course of an organization and drive different outcomes. As we see here, that contrast between how pacesetters react to that versus chasers, 137% difference. Just a really marked difference in terms of how this pacesetter population is driving differences within their own organizations. So on the next slide, to just summarize the research, you'll see a lot of words here. And the way we want to leave this, when you're sitting in front of your clients walking through this research and these insights, we want to leave the study with three main categories of really things to think about and really placeholders for your clients to think about what does this research and how does this pacesetter behavior compare to their organization, sort of where do they sit on that continuum. And so we've categorized these three categories of setting ambitious objectives, taking a more strategic and collaborative approach with SaaS, and then broadening your collaborative base with software as a service as these three broad categories. And we've drilled down and provided some questions that can serve as discussion points when you're sitting with your client. There's also ways for your clients to take this information back to their organization and really internalize what this means, how their company is embracing SaaS, what the relationship is between their own IT group and their line of business leaders that are driving decisions and trying to make a difference in the marketplace. We hope that they will take this information and really think about how SaaS drives a difference in an enterprise cloud strategy. Is there an enterprise cloud strategy? Does that translate into a software as a service strategy? And then finally on the far left, to really think about all the benefits, right? It's not just about enterprise efficiency. As we saw here, there are higher order value statements that this pacesetter population especially identifies with that really every company can embrace and leverage, and it's really a factor of really understanding what those values are and structuring your organization and your relationships between IT and line of business to acknowledge this value and embrace it and drive it through the organization. So that's really the point of this slide. I want to sort of just transition into some additional assets, but before we do on the next slide, again, just to reinforce who the two speakers are on today's call, Suzanne Hupfer, who you heard a little bit earlier. Feel free to reach out to Suzanne with any questions about the study itself, any deeper dive into any of the points or clarification of any of the points that you see today. I'm also very happy to help with clarifying any of those points, especially from a market perspective, from a customer perspective, and as well as translating those points into how you can best present those in front of a client and link those points and those outcomes especially to other case studies that we have within our library. On the next slide, I've provided just some additional resources. So for those of you that are familiar with the IBM SaaS portfolio, you might already be accessing these enablement assets and tools throughout the organization, but for those that might be newer to the company or haven't invested as much time into learning about the portfolio, these are some great links where we've got some great overall knowledge and documents and insights about the overall IBM software as a service and business process as a service portfolio. You'll find recorded webinars, you'll find white papers, you'll find pricing guides, et cetera, points of view, and more. So feel free to familiarize yourself with this content. And again, if you have any questions about any of the assets that you see in that library, please feel free to reach out to me. And on the final slide, you'll see the link. This is the public link. This is the vanity URL that we'll be promoting that will point to the page on the Center for Applied Insights website where all the publicly facing assets will reside as of January 27th. Once this content goes live, there you'll see the white paper. There you'll see an infographic. We'll be rolling out a diagnostic tool sometime after the 27th that will serve as a good conversation starter to help your clients really sort of self-assess where they fall on the continuum, as well as a number of other assets. So I encourage you to use that link and share that link with your clients, starting on the 27th to help promote this content. So with that, again, I want to thank you for joining us on today's call and to learn a little bit more about this compelling research to help drive a better point of view with software as a service in the marketplace. Any questions, feel free to follow up with either Suzanne or myself. Thanks very much.